Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! This week's discussion is part 2 of my series on the history of Magic and Shadowrun. This week I will be focusing on the 2050s and early 2060s. Magic during this point had reached the core foundation for which we would understand it in later editions. This is where Magic starts in the setting, the level of understanding it starts at, and it builds on that over the next 30 years, both real world and in-game world. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the discussion as we talk about Magic and Shadowrun, the 2050s. The most fundamental aspect for a magician is their tradition. Without a tradition, the magician cannot force astral energies to take the forms needed for spells or summon up spirits. And the tradition itself dictates how this process goes. There are two core traditions. These are the ones that we saw in 2050, and all others are kind of variations on these as time goes on. These two core traditions are Hermetic magic and shamanistic magic. Hermetic magicians, called mages for short, are extremely formulaic. Everything they do has specific qualities, specific motions, specific tones. To cast a spell, they have to go through all these precise gestures. A Force 1 fireball will look the same every single time from a Hermetic magician. A Force 3 fireball will look the same every single time. Every spell will look identical each and every time that Hermetic magician casts it. When they summon a spirit, they go through a process that takes hours. The upside is their spirits last longer. The downside is it takes them hours to summon the spirit. And it has to be done in a pre-prepared circle. From there, all that is done. For shamanic casters, shamans, spirit summoning is impromptu. If they're needing a spirit and they're in a back alley with a burning trash can on one end and a door halfway down the other, they could summon a fire spirit or a hearth spirit. If they're out in the woods, they could summon an earth spirit from the ground, plant spirits from the trees, air spirit from the sky above. But what really sets the shamans apart is their totem. Every shaman has a totem. And these totems are all animals. And they bless the shamans with bonuses on some spells. Spells in keeping with the nature of that totem. And they come with restrictions. Things that a shaman can't do while being a follower of that totem. And if they mess up, they have to make amends to their totem. But the other thing that goes with the shamans is a phenomenon called the shaman's mask, the shamanic mask. And what it is as a shaman casts spells, their totem gathers more power around them. And they slowly get a ghostly overlay of their shaman's image over their face. So, a Force 1 spell, cast a couple times, maybe that shaman of eagles nose is going to be a little bit more look a little bit more beak-like. Maybe his cheeks might look a little bit more angular. By the time he's casting some Force 7, Force 8, Force 9 spells, in the middle of his dancing and chanting, he's going to look like he has an eagle head ghostly appearing over his own. And that's what the shamanic mask is. It's actually only seen in actual shamans, not traditions that are similar to shamanism. Of course, one of the first traditions we learn about, other than these core two, is revealed in the first magic supplement for the core of Shadowrun, the Grimoire. This tradition is the Druids. Now, they are an environmentalist-based tradition, and they're sort of a combination of Hermetic and Shaman. They have totems, but their totems are things like sun and moon and oak. They don't have the shamanic mask, though spirits that they summoned are summoned fairly quickly. But they still have to prepare their circle to be able to summon such spirits. And then it's the fact that their magic does tend to be formulaic, precise, very much like a Hermetic's. And that became the core of the Druids. So at this point, we have three main traditions. They're all kind of a little different. They'll kind of interact a little bit differently. We have the Hermetics, we have the Shamans, and we have the Druids. In Awakenings, New Magic in 2057, it reveals another major tradition. And this one gets weird, at least compared to the others. This is the Voodoo tradition. And spirit summoning in this tradition is quicker than Hermetic. Not quite as fast as Shamanic. And what happens is the individual Voodoo have their main Loa, and it processes like a totem. And they can contact others over the course of time, and they can summon any of the Loa that they know, though it's easier for them to summon their own. And unlike the shamanic tradition, these spirits possess the summoner. This was the first possession tradition. And, they do their magic in a similar way to the shamans. It is a more ecstatic type practice. Spellcasting is not always going to be identical every single time. But you're still dealing with a tradition that loses some of its autonomy for their own unique way of doing things. Now, of course, as we get to 2060, there's been some greater understanding of magic. And various ethnic and regional practices have become dubbed as traditions. And pretty much all of these are labeled as subsets of shamanic or hermetic, with many of them actually being seen as more leaning towards the shamanic. Of course, things will really change as we move further on, but that's for the next video. Because what I have to talk to you about next is the basics of how magic works during this time. So let's continue with that right now. Regardless of how you cast your magic, magic worked the same way for everyone. You pulled astral energy through you, shaped it, channeled it, and it had an effect. This is why magic was draining. Some spells were known to be easier for the body to handle and would do stun drain. Other spells were extremely hard to cast and would do what was called physical drain. You're basically dealing with stun drain being fatigue, physical drain being your eyes starting to bleed or a nosebleed, or just welts forming on you as you cast the spell. And that's basically the process of casting a spell. Now, every spell during this period, you learned it at a single force rating. So, if I wanted to learn Fireball, I could learn Fireball as a Force 1 Fireball. I could learn it as a Force 2. I could learn it as a Force 3. If I learned it at one force, I couldn't cast it at any other force. So, if I learned a Force 2 Fireball, it was a Force 2. I couldn't cast a Force 3 or a Force 1 unless I also learned a Force 3 and a Force 1. Force 3 spells, by the way, were considered military grade. And as such, you were supposed to, if you knew how to cast one, have a license. Most Shadowrunners had Force 3 spells. Most didn't have licenses. Another very interesting thing we had in the 2050s was a process called grounding. What this was if you were in the astral and someone had a fetish, you could, or a foci, you could cast a spell and it would go through that foci and affect the holder. Or if it was an area effect spell, it would go through the foci and affect everyone around the holder. And that was a big deal. By 2060, however, the understanding of magic had adjusted, and basic safeguards to prevent this sort of thing started being put into the manufacture of all foci. At least that's the general belief on why this was dropped from the rules. Now, what was very interesting in this time period, later editions will handle certain types of combat spells differently. But in this era, combat spells worked through one simple way. They burn from the inside out. So it doesn't matter if you did a mana ball, mana bolt, fireball, or hellblast. It burned from the inside out. Armor didn't apply. No real defenses applied other than just your body being able to take what it was getting. So, while most of us think of a fireball today as a wall of fire emanating out from a central point, the Shadowrun ball of fire, at least in the 2050s, was the mage would cast it, and all the targets within the area would spontaneously self-combust from the inside out. And if they lived, well, you'd do it again. Fireball was a powerful spell, but it was stun drain. It was moderate damage. Hellblast was physical drain and deadly damage. And most mages who wanted to take out a large number of people quick used Hellblast, not Fireball. Because if you're going to take that drain, you might as well make sure your opponents aren't getting back up. But, this is really the main issues with Magic in the 2050s. It was straightforward. It worked. And there really wasn't much delving into the theories of it. There were magical threats that were insect shamans and toxic shamans, but these were both shamans with totems. They worked the same way as other shamans, more or less. But, with this, we start looking forward to the next era in Shadowrun history, the 2070s, when the universal magic theory is developed and everything changes on a fundamental level. Because that will be an era when the understanding of magic shifts it radically. So, if you liked this video, please click like and subscribe down below. If you'd like to see notifications of updated videos, please click the little bell icon. And I will see you next week as I talk about 2070s magic and beyond. So until then, I'd like you all to just remember to have fun and keep gaming.